Hey kids at home, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich here, back with another installment of an inside look at the toy industry. And today we're talking about Batman, and we're also talking about He-Man. Two of the mans, right? And two of the bands that are really big into toys. The reason I want to talk about both He-Man and Batman today is because there's a direct connection between how the Batman action figure toy lines work and how the 2000X Masters of the Universe line worked. Now, Batman is the gift that keeps giving for toy makers. You can take a basic Batman toy and repaint it in lots of ways that are traditional for Batman. Blue, gray and black, blue and black. You can also paint Batman in all sorts of cool, funky colors, like Tech Shield Batman and Arctic Blast Batman and orange red sun blasting Batman. You get the point. Everyone knows that Batman comes in lots and lots of different colors. And I made a previous video about the history of this. I was not implying that Batman invented the toy variant. Not at all. I mean, there were plenty of toy lines that had variants before Batman came along. I mean, heck, going back to the very first action figure line of all time, which is arguably the G.I. Joe line from the 1960s, well, I mean, that line was basically one giant variant, with every figure originally just being G.I. Joe and being able to do him in all sorts of different military outfits, but still basically the same character. And of course, Star Wars also had lots of variants. You could buy Luke Skywalker for every new movie in different outfits, sometimes more than one outfit per movie, such as Empire Strikes Back that had, Hoth and Bespin. All right. And of course, Masters of the Universe did have variants in the vintage line. So this is the original He-Man from 1982, decked out in his armor, sword, shield, and axe, the armor which at that point generated his force field. That's a YouTube video for another time. Now, there were lots of variants of He-Man in the vintage line, this is true, but if you look at them from a color palette standpoint, all of them are the same core He-Man colors, meaning red and silver. Whatever variant, whatever armor he's wearing as the line went on, all of his different action features and armor styles and looks all reflected the same original tonal color palette, the same as Skeletor. I'm just showing the He-Man as an example, but if you go back and you look at the Skeletor variants, they're also the same thing. They're all in basically a purple variant type of color scheme. So yes, there are variants, but they still recognize as He-Man. The reason I bring this up is going back to a previous video where I spotlighted Tech Shield Batman, which was the first Batman figure ever done in a non-traditional Batman color. And because of the success of this figure, it now opened the door that toy companies no longer needed to make Batman in just his blue and gray or his black and, yellow highlights outfit. You could now make Batman for all sorts of different specific adventures, different specific cases where he had to wear armor and or toy colors that helped him achieve one particular goal, be it going into the sewers or flying in outer space or going in the Antarctic. Whatever it was, this Tech Shield Batman opened up the door to doing the Caped Crusader in all sorts of cool, very toyetic colors that were going to ideally get children to buy a second Batman in an alternate color, once they already had the traditional Batman. Now, one of the reasons this works for a line like Batman is because Batman has a relatively small cast of supporting characters. I mean, yes, he absolutely has his allies, and, not just Barbara Gordon here, but obviously, Robin and Nightwing and Commissioner Gordon and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, he has his rogues gallery. And it's very colorful. He's got some of the best villains, honestly, of all of pop culture. And they make excellent toys. But Masters of the Universe has more characters than Batman. I mean, a lot more characters than Batman. It's not just limited to He-Man and Skeletor. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of characters in Masters of the Universe. So when the 2000X series, or otherwise known as the Mike Young series, that was the animation company that made it, started working on the show, Mattel was very excited to start working on a corresponding toy line. The approach they took was the Batman approach, meaning they were looking at the main villain and the main hero and finding ways to release multiple variants of that character in different armor and different styles so that he could go on missions similar to Batman. You had your Ice He-Man, you had your Forest He-Man. And even as the line kept going, sometimes the colors would just get, I guess if you will, thrown on the figure without a specific mission in mind, just to make the figure stand out in aisle to kids as this is different. Meaning if you already own Skeletor and you want to buy a second Skeletor, well, this Skeletor clearly visually looks different than the one you already own. So maybe you will make the choice to buy a second Skeletor now. And this continued to go on, not only doing variants of the figures, but just doing straight up repaints of the figures in wackier and wackier colors. Disco Skeletor being one who got a legend of his own. And this was not limited at all to the main characters. This bled over into the secondary characters as well, where they started getting variants and what I call wacky color variants. Now, a reason for this is also where the mindset of Mattel was at the time. If you look at the DC Superheroes line, which was coming out more or less at the same time as the MOTU 2000X line, you will see the same approach being taken. All of the basic figures were more or less released in two different decos. So Darkseid got black and blue releases. The same thing with a character like Doomsday. His first release was the traditional gray skin with orange suit and white bony armor not projectiles, but his bones is whatever, the spikes, whatever they are. And then he got re-released later on in the next year's assortment, all in red and on fire. And while this at first actually might seem similar to Disco Skeletor, where they were just painting Doomsday willy-nilly in any color, it actually has reference into the Justice League Unlimited show, where the very first Doomsday figure that Mattel released for the JLU series was in his traditional gray skin and green pants. But then a re-release of this same figure, or tool, meaning it's already sculpted and tooled up, was done in a red coloring with orange highlights. And this color scheme was then adapted for 6-inch. Of course, the reason it worked in the animated series is because there was, more or less direct reference. In the show, the episode that had Doomsday in it, he and Superman wind up fighting inside of a giant volcano, and there's several scenes where the red of the volcano is reflecting on both characters, and they look kind of like they're red, and that was what the figure was based on. The fact that a 6-inch figure got this color scheme was basically because it was an approved color scheme for Doomsday, and it was aimed at kids, and hopefully kids would want to buy a second Doomsday in a different color. Now, going back to the Masters of the Universe line, looking at the variants that came out in 2000X, it was done much more in a Batman-type way, where here, for example, you have Jungle Attack He-Man with his bow and arrow, a very traditional He-Man weapon, right? As well as his tattoos to make him look camouflage. So if you look at a Batman line, you're going to see that it's filled with both villains and sidekick heroes, but there are lots and lots of variants of Batman, whether they come in traditional colors or, shall we say, less traditional colors to make them more toyetic. Now, this works for Batman specifically because he's all about tech and gear, and the toys started playing that up after the success of Tech Shield Batman, which I covered in the previous video. Once this hurdle was cleared, the green light was essentially given to start doing Batman in basically any color he could be sold in. Now, of course, kids still wanted their first Batman to be show-specific or reflect the content, to look like a traditional Batman. No one is saying that. No one's going to kind of start with Arctic Blast Batman, except unless, of course, you did. But the thinking was if you want to buy a second Batman, offering him in a different, unique color is going to get you to do that. And at the time, it was thought, we could take this successful way toys are distributed and apply it to Masters of the Universe. Now, He-Man variants obviously do work, especially in a collector line when the figures are reflecting the vintage line. But for a line that's aimed at kids where you're trying to tech up the hero, it doesn't work with every hero. Batman it works with. Iron Man, it totally works. Iron Man has different armors that he uses even in the content, meaning the comic books, and to some extent the movies and the video games, to go on different missions and have different advantages. This works for Batman, it works for Iron Man. The reason it doesn't work so much for Masters of the Universe is because it is about the universe. It's about the diversity of characters, having your bug characters and your nature spirit characters and your cyborg characters and your royalty and your wizards and your whatever Trapjaw is. Whether you're a kid or a collector, when you're getting into Masters of the Universe, it's about variety. So two paths were essentially in front of Mattel for 2000X, and the thought was Batman is really working right now with lots of variants. Let's apply that to the Masters of the Universe brand. But this is a lot like smashing a round peg into a square hole, or in this case, a square peg into a round hole. You can't force one brand to behave like another one. How do toy companies overcome this? Well, that's really where my company comes in. Spectre Creative is all about understanding the emotional connection between consumer and product, and it's also about understanding the product line and the license. So while Batman works as one type of toy line, He-Man does not. You can't put out He-Man in countless variants because that's not the way people collect and play with He-Man. Understanding the property helps make better toys, and that's what I love to do. So if you are a toy company looking to make better toys, check me out, spectrecreative.com online. Our goal is to help toy companies and content producers make better toy product. And that comes from understanding the brand, the consumer, and the emotional connection that brings them all together. Thanks for watching.